Welcome to the Legends Behind the Craft podcast, where we feature top leaders in the wine and craft beverage industry with your host, Drew Hendricks. Now, let's get started with the show.
Drew Hendricks here. I'm the host of the Legends Behind the Craft podcast, where I talk with leaders in the wine and craft beverage industry. From the founder of Bottle Van, whose technology brings a wine story to life, to today's guest, Lawrence Francis, who helps wine brands tell their stories through his podcast, Interpreting Wine. Today's episode, it's sponsored by Barrels Ahead. At Barrels Ahead, we work with you to implement a one-of-a-kind marketing strategy, one that highlights your authenticity, tells your story, and connects you with your ideal customers. In short, if you're a business looking to retain a winery or craft beverage producer as a client, Barrels Ahead will figure out a plan to make it happen. Go to barrelsahead.com today to learn more. I am super excited today to talk with Lawrence Francis, host of the podcast Interpreting Wine. And I want to give a big thank you to Lori Milote from Outshinery for introducing us. Lori and her team at Outshinery, they've revolutionized bottle shots through 3D rendering. Now, Lawrence, our guest today, he believes that most wine brands, regions, and countries are underestimating the podcast opportunity that exists right now, an opportunity unseen since the early days of social media. And decided to show rather than tell, Lawrence grew Interpreting Wine from scratch in September of 2017 to where it now reaches wine trade professionals in 138 countries. And in 2022, his statistics are incredible. He was reaching nearly 150,000 listeners and averaging an incredible 22 minutes per play. Interpreting Wine, it collaborates with forward-thinking wine brands to seamlessly communicate their key messages and stories via its trademark long-format podcast series. Welcome to the show, Lawrence.
Hey, great to be here.
Oh, thank you so much for joining. So, Lawrence, tell us, how did you get started with the podcasting?
Yeah, it's a kind of a funny one, really. You know, I always hark back to my I guess short-term story, which was that in 2017 I was living in Madrid. I'm a born and bred Brit, as you can hear, but I also speak Spanish, and that was probably. That was another unfulfilled passion that I have is languages, and specifically Spanish and specifically Spain, and was living there and managed to score a job as a translator, but that was a sort of a shortish term gig. So I was looking to stay in Spain, and I do speak Spanish to a good level, but I think the holy grail is finding a job where you can still work in your native language, and there are even fewer of those in Spain. But I found what I thought was my dream job to enable me to stay in Spain, which was actually doing social media and some online marketing for a tapas tour company. So these companies that would, take the visiting Americans and Brits all around Madrid and go down the back alleys and find these tapas places. And I had a bit of a gap between the sort of first and second interviews, and I thought I need something, because this is going to be a really competitive position. So I need to sort of set myself apart. And I got to work in those 2 weeks. I was like, okay, I went from I never thought about releasing a podcast about wine to I'd actually traveled from Madrid down to Penedès wine region. I'd set up meetings with producers, and I'd already had the first episode live by the time I had that second round interview.
Oh,
and
fantastic.
Long story short, I didn't get the job. And as I said, we're coming up to nearly 4 years ago now, but that was, still one of the most significant decisions ever, was to just say, look, I'm going to just go ahead and do this, really without much of a plan beyond getting the job, but didn't get the job, but the podcast stayed.
That's amazing. So 440 episodes in 4 years. That's a frenetic pace. What kind of passion fueled that?
I think it was, there were a few things. I mean, maybe another missing ingredient of the origin story is also, somebody who I still admire, an entrepreneur called Gary Vaynerchuk, who is basically, something of an oracle. He's this guy who has sort of predicts social media trends, and really, I think is just so passionate. It's just infectious, that his the amount of passion that he has for kind of just getting your truth out there. And I just remember at the time he was just so, you've got to get a podcast going. It's like, this opportunity is not going to be around forever. And I was, in a sense, at the start, I think and certainly into 2018 when really really kind of got going, really got motoring, because I then came back to London and realized that actually there was actually a lot more opportunity for creating content in London. It was more of a hassle in Spain, but in London there was no language barrier. I was close to the action, and because London is such an important hub for wine, there were people coming from all over the world. So I stayed in the same place, and the world came to me. And compared to Madrid, and compared to doing things in Spanish and doing things in multiple languages, it was like I just had my creativity completely unleashed. And it was just that push from Gary, getting the technical bits out of the way in Spain. I just sort of see that as, okay, finding the right bits of kit and just getting my confidence, getting my training wheels. And then it just went off, because I basically had as many people to interview as I wanted. And I kind of just, for fun, I did that. I remember releasing an episode a day for 2 months. And that was basically what got me from 20 episodes early in 2018 through to 80. And then it's, as you say, sort of been a little bit more, I like to call it a little bit more Netflix-ized. Mm-hmm. It's sort of, more moving into series and more sort of bringing things out in sort of discrete series, basically, altogether. But that's basically where the passion really started, and that was really just challenging myself, just sort of saying, okay, can I do one a day for a month? And I ended up doing it for 2 months, and that kind of people took notice. Let's just say after that.
Oh, for sure. Now, how did you, from the initial stages, you have an impressive amount, 150,000, few podcasts ever get past to 50, 60 listeners per episode. How did you grow that?
Yeah, I think it's and maybe even to back up slightly, I think because I did sort of, before I went crazy really, and really sort of went into it, I did, I think, take every opportunity I could to ask people who are in the wine industry in London, what are the podcasts that you're listening to? What are the, if you want to learn about wine, because I already knew that it was becoming a more important medium, that there's research that comes out, and it looks at, have you listened to a podcast in the last month? It asks people, have you listened in the last week? And in all of these areas, people's consumption was going up, and it was just, okay, is there enough white space for me to get excited? Okay, I could really kind of move on, pretty quickly here, and sort of, establish myself. And then, it was just, as I say, just sort of getting my head down and getting in front of people. And that, I think, gave me the confidence that there was white space, which meant that I just really kind of lent into it. But what I think I'd also done, which was a in hindsight was a really clever move, was really focusing on growing an Instagram presence primarily at the same time. So pretty much my Instagram started in September 2017, I believe. And what I started doing then, because I could see some of the limitations of podcasts and some of the limitations of social media, what I started doing was sending people from one to the other. So from very early on, I would tell people on Instagram that there were episodes coming, and this is where you can find them, and go and listen to them here. But then on the podcast itself, I would say, oh, if you're listening and you found me through a podcast player or search, go and follow me on Instagram, go and follow me on Facebook. So hopefully, and it has worked out like that. There's this sort of two-way almost like a referral process between my own channels. So I'd say that was huge. That was like massive. I think also, I try to do some of this as well, and I have, some of my biggest opportunities have just come from another Gary Vaynerchuk sort of piece of advice, which is sending basically cold Instagram DMs. So I used to just write to people who I thought might be interested in the podcast, and I would just send them, nicely worded message, just to try to tailor it to what they might be looking for, what they might be interested in. But just send them until Instagram blocked me. You get I think 50 direct messages to people who you don't know per day, and certainly in early 2018, I was regularly getting blocked because I'd sent my 50 or 60 for the day, and I just think that's very interesting, because then some of those people have come and followed me later on, and then I could see earlier on in the chat, like, oh God, I wrote to that person back in 2018, and now they're an important, or they're a big sort of deal, or they're influential person, and now they're coming and following me in 2019. So I think it's just really just staying busy, but I think it starts with having a passion, and believing that the project has got some legs, just that kind of on the ground, asking people, are there lots of other podcasts out there? Am I better off choosing another niche? But I felt like this is a niche that is underserved. I still feel it's underserved. And I was, very, very sort of active with getting the word out there.
That's fantastic. That's fantastic advice. And that's what I was going to ask you about. What advice do you have for people growing their podcast? That cross-channel fertilization, promotion just creates this kind of building ladder.
Yeah. I still think that's a great. I mean, what I, as I say, I called out Instagram there specifically. I mean, what I did, and I think maybe it's a personal preference, but I could have also done other platforms as well. In hindsight, I probably should have done more on Twitter earlier. I still do dabble with Twitter, I would say. But one interesting thing is that a lot of the UK wine trade, they're on Twitter, and they kind of prioritize and spend more time on Twitter than really the other platforms. I think they understand it better because they're very much more towards the written word, and in general, the way that people do well on Instagram is very much more to do with the physicality, and it's why maybe people who are aesthetically good looking, or just younger, or just have just got the eye for it, maybe because they've grown up in a digital world, and maybe some of those people who are a little bit more maybe studious, a bit more sort of reading and a little more into their words, it's actually they can play and they can actually have more fun with Twitter. So that's kind of very important. I also think personally, I think the cadence of release as well has been important. That there was obviously the sort of the mammoth 2-month spree of sort of just putting out lots of different content and in lots of different angles, and I wouldn't necessarily advocate that, but I would certainly say that again, it's a much tougher environment to get noticed in. I mean, there are now, I believe, more than 2 million podcasts on iTunes. When I started, it was closer to 600,000. So even in the last, not even 3 years or so, we've seen this massive increase. So I would personally say that if you want to establish yourself as a podcast in a shorter time, I just think you've got to put out lots of content. I just think that if people are subscribing to lots of different podcasts, I think you want to be one that's there in their feed a lot.
Excellent point.
And I believe that you do the sort of one per week.
I've been wrestling with that. I want it because right now we're recording this. We're recording when it's July. We're recording this, and it's going to air, I think, in the middle of October. So I'm ahead. I've got a nice little padding there. I've got a consistency, but I'm also wrestling with the point that we're recording, and who knows what the world's going to be like in October. We might be talking about something now that is like, oh, I can't believe we said that. That did not age well.
Exactly.
So that coming out every day it makes sense, or coming out almost in real time, almost asynchronously. You talk about, and I like how you mentioned like the Netflixization of the in series, doing it more towards that planned evergreen. Maybe you can talk a little bit more about how your podcast has evolved over the last 4 years and kind of what you've learned.
Sorry, do you mean specifically around the release schedule, or?
Well, not so much the release schedule, but like we're in the early stages of Legends Behind the Craft, and I'm interviewing founders, but I see the podcast, even in the last 10 recordings, kind of evolving more towards the founders' stories or towards a specific point. How did your podcast, how did Interpreting Wine, from the early days to where it is now, how did it evolve?
I think I think it has evolved a lot. Yeah, when I listen back, and I think, to be honest with you, I do just want to make one point that I think is really important. I think it's easy when people are looking at a new medium. I think it's easy for them to get caught up on equipment. Mm-hmm. And basically, I personally see it as wasting a lot of money on equipment that they don't necessarily yet know if they're going to use or not. And I settled on a range of equipment that cost probably about $150, and I use that to record from 1 to 399. So amazing. I would really recommend, and I've got much more expensive equipment now, but I would just say, what I learned there, the microphone control, listening back to it, and it just really kind of opened up, and I've just, I was learning as I was releasing as well. And I think a lot of the idea of actually releasing so many was just to not give me time to kind of say, oh, I don't know if I'm going to put that one out. I don't know if it sounds good enough. Mm-hmm. I kind of short-circuited that because I was like, I'm going to put one out tomorrow. So I've got like 2 hours to edit and get it out there. So I would say probably, my skills then evolved very, very quickly. I think my ability to sort of read the sound in a room and kind of say, okay, we can find a little quiet corner down here and record there. I did quite a few more of those sort of, in the field, literally, at a tasting, a little bit of background noise type recordings, and I really
live in person. So you're talking to your
really authentic, and I personally think that a lot of podcasters miss out on that, because I think we get into this idea. If you listen to too many other podcasts, you get into the idea that everything has to sound like it's in a perfect studio and no background noise, and take out every and ah. And then I realized, as I say, after spending 2 months of putting out one every day, I didn't have time to go through and perfectly make the sound amazing and to take out every hesitation. So they're full of, stutters and false starts and ums and ahs and crutch words, and you know what, they sound authentic, and yes. When I go back and I listen to those early recordings and even the later ones, I'm like, this is just an authentic, real conversation between two people. And I think that very quickly during that period of just intense learning and production, that kind of became my guiding star, and so I'm never ashamed, I would say, to put out something, even if it's not been sort of polished to the nth degree. And I really think that, especially in the early days, you can't get too caught up on it's got to be perfect. It's got to sound like we're in a sort of a padded cell somewhere. It's okay to just have a conversation and to put it up without too much editing.
That's excellent advice. And I can tell you that I fell subject to two of the things you said don't worry about. You can see this mic. I had this mic on my desk and this Rodecaster Pro mixing board for about 3 years, to the point that my wife would come into my office and laugh at me. She's like, when are you going to use that? It just looked fantastic, but it just sat there gathering dust until finally this year I ramped up the podcast. And then the first thing I learned is just do it. Just get out there and do it.
Yeah.
And I learned to roll with the punches. We had one episode where we record these things on Zoom, and I also use Zoom phone for our corporate phones, and I forgot to pause it. I got a call and ended up dropping the person I was interviewing and bringing on the person, and it was a cold call from a guy in India trying to sell us SEO. We ended up taking that out, but in hindsight, I might have kept it in or merged the calls.
This is it. You never know what's going to happen. I mean, a funny moment that you just reminded me of was, and I know a lot of the episode numbers, but episode 15 was with a very well respected sommelier here in London called Honey Spencer, and we actually had a pretty decent recording environment there because we were in her restaurant, and they were finishing the lunch service, and we could go down, which was like a basement bar, and because it was lunch, there was nobody down there, so we had a corner. We had the table for tasting wines. It was perfect. It was like amazing quality background. I was like, this is brilliant, relaxed environment. But literally in the last 60 seconds of the recording, the fire alarm went off because we were down by the kitchen, and I think somebody had burnt something or left something on the stove in the kitchen, and it went off for just sort of about 5 or 6 seconds. But I ended up leaving it in because I was just like, because we were sort of a little bit thrown off after that. And then a few people have told me that they'd been listening to that episode like on the metro, and then they got to that point of the episode, the fire alarm went off, and they stood up like they thought there was something going wrong in the metro, and everybody was looking at them like, what are you doing? What are you jumping? And they didn't realize it was actually on the podcast rather than
that's fantastic.
The metro itself. So these things can just always happen when you least expect it. And I think there's an argument for just leaving them in, but maybe not the cold call.
I don't know. It could have been funny because we ended up laughing about it afterwards, but then that got edited out too because we couldn't figure out why people were laughing at it.
Yeah,
you're completely correct. Keep the storyline going because that's what people are here trying to listen to our story. Yeah. What's another memorable episode that really sticks in your mind? Wow.
Yeah, I mean, as I say, that one was super memorable because I think because Honey Spencer, she's like I say, so well respected. I think then I didn't kind of say, oh look, I've had Honey on, and do you want to come on, sort of thing. But I think people, they check you out, they Google you, and they see who you've had on. Mm-hmm. Maybe one from a little bit further on in time. I mean, even to be honest with you, even looking back to a very, very recent one, which I did with Wines of Washington State.
Yeah, I want to talk to you about that. That's a fascinating series you put together.
Thank you. And I would say that I would talk about the first episode of that. So that was a 3-part series that we recorded in January of this year and then published in February. So the month after. Mm-hmm. And what it ended up being was that essentially they were looking to, and still are looking to, influence the UK market and to reach, UK trade ears, if you like. But they're all in Washington State, and at that time of the year and earlier on this year, it was nigh and impossible to travel or to move around. So what ended up happening was that we had 3 winemakers who were chosen to participate in the series, and they were there, sat over in Washington State with their wines, and I was here, and the same wines were here with me, and we were sort of tasting at this sort of 6,000 mile apart setup, which was just crazy. And because of the time difference, it was like 6 p.m. for me and 10 a.m. for them, which I guess is normal for a winemaker. But one of the things that I think it is relevant, is that my episodes have been gradually getting longer over time. I think at the start, this is something I was scared about. I always used to that was something I did overthink, was if I go over 20 minutes, then somebody who's got, a 20-minute commute, they're going to just leave. They're going to not finish the whole thing. Or somebody who's running for 20 minutes. And that would be something that I would obsess about. And I think it got gradually longer and longer and longer until now, where I literally do not think that there is a sort of a maximum length that I would go to. And the first episode of the Washington series was an hour and a half. So we're now into feature length podcasts. But I listened back to it earlier this week, actually, because I was getting it transcribed, and the guest his name is Juan Munoz Oca. He's the head winemaker at Chateau Saint Michel in Washington State. Their largest producer over there, and he's absolutely brilliant because of all of what he brings out, and the tonality, and basically the different stories that he tells around the geology, around the winemaking, around his personal story, around what they do in the vineyard, about the culture, around just the climate. So many of these things come out, and it's just fascinating. I mean, I'm obviously biased because it's my episode, but I was drawn in again. It's just absolutely brilliant content, and I just think that goes to show how do you get somebody to watch a 1.5 hour video about wine? I think it's really, really important, difficult. I think it's next to impossible, because I think by that point you're competing with the Queen's Gambit, and you're competing with feature length and Netflix and DC Comics and all of these different things. But in that audio space, I feel like we're asking a lot less of people. We're just asking people to listen, but they can have their eyes on other things. So I genuinely think that if somebody was looking for information on Washington State, that would be an absolute pleasure to play while they're driving, or while they're taking a hike, or while they're doing whatever. Really, I just think or even just chunk it up over different days. And I've never been to Washington State, but I genuinely feel from really from that intro episode, and then from exploring with the other two winemakers, I genuinely feel like I've got a really deep understanding of Washington State, and I really feel as though, and I can see from the numbers, that we've passed that on to lots of people out there as well.
That's fantastic. What kind of access does the UK market have to the Washington wines?
Well, interestingly, I was at a Washington wine tasting on Tuesday. So that's sort of part of the same, I guess, year's worth of activities. So they engaged me to do the podcast. They've done a lot of things with trade publications over here. A big one. It's called The Buyer, which I know that they did some promotion of the podcast through there. They had 13 producers' wines being shown at the tasting on Tuesday. And there were a mixture of ones who were represented and those who weren't, kind of 50-50, if I remember correctly. So they are getting known, I would say, and I think that they're excellent as well. I mean, I genuinely think that they put their foot forward as somewhere where you can get excellent wine at a very good price, and at this sort of meeting point of the old world and the new world. And I feel as though that's drawing in a lot of people who will then go on to, I guess, hand sell some of those wines, and kind of, because to your everyday wine drinker, Washington is still probably quite unknown, and the wines still probably do need that, I say, that sort of hand sell, and that following wind given to them by the sommelier, or by the person who's selling them in the specialty or independent wine shop.
It's interesting that you mentioned that it was part of a larger marketing initiative brought about by Washington to bring it in. And your podcast was one of those channels. And it's a great tool. Can you talk for a minute about how wineries can use this kind of long form podcast in conjunction with their tastings and written publications to promote their regions and brands?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I'll just sort of put this in there as if people want to sort of look at something and listen along. But I've got a presentation that I actually did in conjunction with a friend of mine who was working at a large Spanish winery, and it's online now at Interpreting Wine /Media Kit. And I think
look, I saw it. That you have a fantastic media kit. It's
you.
worth visiting that just to see the media kit.
and I think what was really I think that kind of the game changer in terms of putting that together was, I think, in different stages was firstly sort of building the credibility of the channel, because I think a lot of people, I think because maybe they don't listen to podcasts, then they're not sure that it's got merit, and they're not so sure that anybody is listening, basically. But I had no idea before, but I've had now 20 Masters of Wine on the podcast. So I think building that credibility first, and this is again another great trick that I'm sure, or great tip even that I'm sure you've come across as well, is that just because of where we are now, and people are a little bit more curious about it, you can get, I think, better people to come onto a podcast, and more influential people and more famous people to come onto a podcast versus, do you want to write and be in my blog, and do you want to do an Instagram live together? I genuinely feel as though podcast has got that sweet spot right there. So even if, say, a winery wanted to maybe not go down the Master of Wine route, but maybe they wanted to get some some more famous people, sports people, or TV personalities, or local personalities, anyone, I think, it's not about getting Masters of Wine on there at any cost. It's about getting people on there who are going to resonate with your audience. And so if the winery knows the audience, they know what type of people like their wines, they don't necessarily need to have only wine content on there. They might, as I say, they might discover that there's a local sports star, or local TV person, or a news anchor, or whoever it is, but somebody who will resonate with the audience that also happens to like wine, and they can have them, coming on and talking about wine there. So I think that's kind of a sort of a bit of an easy win as well. I think also the other chart that was just really kind of put it all on the line for me, really, was really the way that I started describing how people interact with my episodes, because I hadn't really taken the time to do the analysis until COVID came along, and it kind of forced me to really grow the left side of my brain and go in and just crunch some numbers and just sort of see, okay, this is what happens when something is posted. And as you say, the average listen in 2020 was 22 minutes. That's
fantastic, considering you're going for 20-minute episodes.
at the start, yeah, that was as you can see, they've gotten even longer since then, because I'm like, people are staying, people will hang around. But what I then, and I think that's relevant, because I'm not sure that wineries who, for example, are focusing on plays and follows, and I personally, I call those vanity metrics, because a play in Instagram, it comes after 3 seconds. So you might sort of, be scrolling through your feed, and then, something car backfires outside, you look around, and you're on the video for 3 seconds, and then you keep flicking. But they're like, wow, another one, and and that happens a lot. People who are just aimlessly in the feed, and I think to have the ability to communicate with somebody who is interested in your brand for 20 minutes, albeit this is, at the end of sort of, 3-4 years of growing the podcast. But I think, hopefully that gives somebody listening just the kind of the North Star, that actually, okay, we might not be reaching millions of people, as you can get very intimidated by the sort of millions and millions of views on YouTube, but we might not be reaching millions of people via a podcast, but the ones that we are reaching, they're going to be hanging around for 5 minutes or 10 minutes. And I think it's that building that deeper relationship. And I don't think unfairly, I actually have benchmarked in that same presentation, like how much actual engagement you get with your audience. For example, when you go to a wine fair, and I basically inflated the figure, and I said, look, if you're a one winemaker at a table talking to 5 people for 8 hours, if my maths is correct, then that's 40 hours. It's 8 hours times 5 people. I mean, and that's never going to happen, is it really? You're never going to be in that conversation where you're talking constantly. And the average of my channel really now and the podcast, and in the first couple of months now, it's very common to get over 500 hours of engagement from an episode, and the Washington ones are doing almost double that, really, after a longer period of time, but they're all well over 800 hours now. And I just think it's worth asking about and thinking about the depth to which you're communicating with your target audience, versus getting too caught up in this number of plays and that person's got this much followers, so we should send them some wine. And I think podcasting, it's a different type of medium, and I think people are kind of there for the long haul. And I really think that wineries have just got so much to say, and they've got a big enough story to tell, that I think they need to think about, kind of making feature length content rather than these sort of snippets and short form content that I think the majority are making at the moment.
That makes a lot of sense. Is that where you mentioned how you're going towards more of a serialization and more of like an evergreen type of content? How do you see that your podcast growing or where it is now?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. Evolving. I think serialization. Maybe it's a little bit of just thinking about what else is happening. I genuinely don't listen to too many other wine podcasts. No offense, but I like to get out there and just see what else is happening in society, and I think we would be foolish to not see that the effect that Netflix has had on our behaviors and our entertainment habits is colossal. It is so huge. And, I'm a Netflix subscriber, and you can hardly get a decent movie on there anymore. There's everything is series. Everything is around drawing out the experience. Everything is about really putting the viewer in control, where if they want to, as I say, just binge Queen's Gambit over one night or one weekend, then they can, and that's up to them. They don't have to just come back every Thursday night at 9:00. So I basically just really looked at that phenomenon in our wider society and said, I should be doing that. I'm not creating series for a streaming channel, but I've got an audio streaming channel. So why shouldn't I put out series like that? Why shouldn't I put out 10 episodes in 10 days? So this is, it's not as sort of scattergun as before, where it was lots of different topics. It's one topic, but it comes out in the space of a week, or it comes out, in the case of Washington, one episode every Wednesday over 2 weeks, just so that we had a little bit longer, because they were longer episodes as well, let people catch up. So I don't see myself changing that approach anytime soon. I think that works. I think, I've even shown that with a series of 3 episodes, they get 35% more listening than just a single episode, and a series of 5 episodes gets 45% more listening. So it's like I liken it to making the target bigger, so that if maybe, you might catch the last episode on Washington of the 3, but then you realize, hold on, there's actually another 2 here. I really enjoyed that last one. Let me go back to the first and the second ones and kind of catch up almost. And I just think that's it. It's just, making the target bigger, making more content out there, and my ambition, and it's coming as well now, is just to be better on the other end of the spectrum, which is actually then creating more micro content out of that larger hour and a half episode, because that's obviously that's like a main course.
Absolutely, that is.
So I can shave little bits off that and make the sort of make the intro, and make the taster, and make the tapas out of that main course. And I think that's something that I need to do more of, and I want to do more of. So
I love that you mentioned micro content, because you could go through all those 440 episodes, and there's a ton of little segments that can be pulled out into Instagram using Headliner app or any of those.
Well,
and that's a big note to wineries or anybody looking for a podcast, that you get, as you said, the main course, but you get that fodder to dice it up 100 different ways, having done the one 1 hour show.
Absolutely. And I think, where I think that they really can be used as well, because I've had so many ideas over almost like too many ideas really. But I think, one thing that can definitely go in and kind of inform is like, marketing materials, that those stories that maybe they only come out when you're talking and when you're comfortable and when you're relaxed, and you kind of maybe blown through all the other, the usual stories, and then the real stories come out, and maybe there's some wine on the table and everyone's relaxed. Those are great to capture, just to have in audio format. But then also, that they can be turned into quotes. They can go into company presentations. They can sort of go into what you talk about in the tasting room. There's so many. They can that could be the audio that accompanies just a shot of your winery and what you do at your winery, and it just a way to bring what you do to life, and engage the people who want the engaging, who are the wine fans, who are they've been locked down, and they've been in isolation for so long, and they'd love nothing more, I'm sure, than just to be able to come out to wine country. But maybe if they can't, then they can kind of have that experience through your wine. And I think the more that the wineries share stories, I think that's how they then still give people that kind of virtual experience.
Fantastic. So on the Washington Wine Series, you were engaged by the Washington Wine Bureau, or who was the person that led off the series?
I'm sorry, you broke up just slightly.
Oh, sorry. The Washington Wine Series that we've been talking about, when they who came to you to start this series up? Like who engaged you?
So that was actually through their PR agency in the UK.
Oh, okay.
A company called Sopexa. So they work. They're very, very well known. I think originally French company, but they work with many different wine regions, and they're really wine events specialists, I would say. So even the tasting I was at on Tuesday, that was run by them. So I got to sort of see in person some of the people that I was working with on that series.
I was getting there because there's so many other regions here that you can uncover with I'd love to see you do Oregon next. You got to talk to Sepexa about that.
Well, I mean, I did. I think I don't know if I mentioned before. I did get over to the Willamette Valley in January of 2020.
Oh yeah, that's right.
And in hindsight, it was just the most brilliant time to get over there. But I was so impressed. I got to say. I mean, and this is the thing when you ask about which episodes sort of stand out. I mean, I would certainly say again that a lot of those Oregon episodes, a lot of those Willamette Valley episodes, they were just an absolute pleasure to edit, because one thing that the audio gives you is just it gives you a record of what you've spoken about. And some of these winemakers are so articulate, I would say, and just so charismatic and just draw you in that it's just nice to not have to sort of try to write everything down or try to remember everything. It's like, okay, it's being recorded. I'm going to hear this again. It's going in the cloud. And as much as anything, to have all of those phenomenal voices and personalities there, kind of whenever I want to go and revisit them, if I ever have the time, it's just brilliant. It's absolutely brilliant to have.
What was one of the highlights of your Oregon trip? Do you have a specific story in mind?
It was very intense. So I visited 20 producers and interviewed 20 producers.
Holy moly! You did do a
7
series.
days.
I stand corrected.
So and that is actually my most popular series, and I think that was really when it really kind of came home to me of this thing of the longer format, because as you see, almost all of them are 50 minutes, 45 minutes. There's so many that kind of come out, I would say, but I think probably the one that I think they had the most feedback on as a guest was actually when I interviewed Claire Carver, who is the wife of the winemaker at a producer called Big Table Farm, and she's actually a very accomplished artist. And I ended up going not to the farm, which I had done on most other visits there, but to what they call their atelier, which is like it's like it's her studio, and it's also where they do private tastings in the center of Carlton. So it's right there. It's a sort of renovated building. It's I think it used to be a dairy, and then it used to be another tasting room, and we literally just sat there at the back of this atelier, in this space which kind of could have seated around 20. It was literally, there's this huge table, which she told me is a replica of the Big Table, which the farm and the wine brand is named after. But I felt so privileged because it was just the two of us there. But again, I think really feeling as though I've always treated the microphone as the third person at the table. I never just sort of let it sit there and forget about it. I like to make it a part of the conversation, and I really think that that's important. It's like you can't just have it there, and people notice. It's like when you're on the phone. Are you holding the phone to your ear, or you're on loudspeaker? It's never the same as when you're holding it close to your ear like that. So we were doing that with the mic, and Claire, I've got a reputation, I think, for asking big questions, and I was just asking her the biggest questions, and very much like an artist, she was just painting in these absolutely phenomenal descriptions of the farm. She gave me and of course then the listener this sort of virtual farm tour, and we were taken up the hillside and in the 4x4, and we could see all the animals, we could see the plantings. I really just have this such a crystal clear sense of being on the farm and what it would be like to be on the farm at different times of the year. Just from a conversation. And I just think that audio for me, it really is, it's a difference between watching a book and watching the movie, or reading a book, sorry, and watching the movie. And it's just that when you read a book, it's a lot more personal to you. You make the image yourself in your mind. You fill in the gaps. I guess that's the part of the skill of writing. You give enough blank canvas there for somebody to project onto that. Whereas with a film, there's obviously other devices at play, but you've got to show somebody something. You have to be a lot more. This is what that person looks like. This is the actor. This is what they're wearing. This is the chair they're sitting in. You can't necessarily hint at those things. And I think it's the same with the audio. Somebody who's really skilled, as Claire is, and really, I could have picked anybody out from the Oregon series, but when you're that skilled, it's just an absolute pleasure, and you just get immersed. And I think that's why going longer with them is actually better, because you just get taken into this world that you kind of don't want to leave.
That's fantastic, man. As we're wrapping down this episode, speaking about long ones, what podcast do you you don't have to listen to the wine podcast? What's your non-wine podcast go to these days?
What have I was listening to something. Yeah. So what I might just mention. And it kind of ties back in, and maybe is a good place to sort of start to close out as well. But I'm evolving interpreting wine as a business as well.
Oh yeah.
I've been doing lots of work on the business and not just in the business. So that's why the output has sort of slowed down a bit. But I like to feel as though, okay, you've got plenty to catch up on. I'm not sure anybody has sort of looked at all of these, and so as I say, I know that interpreting wine is already bringing a lot of value to wineries and to wine regions and kind of putting that out there. But I feel like there's more to be done. And so I've actually recently joined what's called a Startup Accelerator to really kind of unpack more about what I could be doing really, and kind of where this could all be heading. And I'm really convinced now that I'll tell you that the name of the accelerator is called the Dent Accelerator. It's a company that runs these accelerators for companies at different phases of their life, in principally in three time zones: Australia, UK, and US. And their tenet that I just think really resonated with me is that everybody who starts a business is already sitting on this huge mountain of knowledge, and I genuinely believe that sitting on, metaphorically, 440 episodes and over 160 winemaker interviews, I genuinely feel as though I'm one of the most tuned in people out there of what makes a good story, and what are the ways that winemakers should be telling their stories to really engage people and to do it as good and as well as those Oregon winemakers that I was talking about. And I think that is something that can be taught. I think it's something that can be repeated, and I think it's something that it takes time and it's difficult. But what I'm doing now is putting together essentially my own accelerator, really, which I'm calling the Wine Impact Accelerator, which is really kind of bringing out from those winemakers what I call the 6 wine stories that they should be telling kind of concurrently for maximum impact, so that their story really gets out there and really resonates. And I genuinely feel as though telling a story on a podcast is a fantastic place to start, but it's also got to be through all the other channels, including in person and including video and social media. But I understand that can be very overwhelming for for a winemaker. But I think I genuinely feel as though there's so much that if winemakers and wineries could add some of that to what they're doing, then I think it would make a lot of the other parts of their business a lot easier and would make them a lot more fun as well, I think.
Absolutely. There's such a need for that. I love the 6 wine stories that you should be able to tell if you've got a winery, and helping them categorize that is brilliant, because too often we go in and we're like, tell me your story, or in marketing, we're like, we'll help you create your story, but the person doesn't even know what the framework is. By giving them this accelerator framework, I love the phrasing that you did there. It's very timely.
Thank you. Yeah. I'm kind of, putting it out there and putting it in front of producers. I mean, my main target, and I think the people who need it the most right now are ones who are looking to export. So, wineries who are in New Zealand, who, there's not that many New Zealand people, so they have to export their wine. And when you've had, for example, an absolute phenomenon like a Marlborough Sauvignon Blanc, how do you then now, as a new entrant into the market, how do you stand out as a Marlborough Sauvignon Blanc? How do you sort of not just get caught up in literally the wave of Sauvignon Blanc that's coming over? And it's true for many regions. It's like, how do you stand out as a Malbec from Argentina? How do you stand out as a Pinot Noir from Willamette Valley? I think there's a lot to be done there, because what I think a lot of wine regions have done so well is like, okay, this is what you get from our region. This is the grape style. This is how we do it here. And that's a story that has resonated with people, but it also means that then, that there's a risk of commoditization. And I think that, story kills commoditization. That's another new quote. So that I think is the secret. I really think that is the secret. Is people who are really got a sort of a clear view and a clear route to telling their story. I think that they really then do have that unfair advantage. But the beauty of it is that every winemaker that I've met has had their own mountain of knowledge that they're sitting on, is their story and their knowledge, and it's just about packaging that up in the right way.
That's fascinating, man. Thank you. You have been so generous with your time here. I have to ask one question though before we go. Okay. It has to do with stories. Do you see a regionalization? The story, will it play as well in the US as it is in the UK, or does the winery need to kind of modify their story for the country that they're trying to enter into?
Yeah, it's good question. I mean, that I think is very important. So I've got that. So that's it essentially. So then the 6 stories is essentially step 2 of the process, and step 1 is what I call survey. Or survey. So it's actually, again, thinking about where you're trying to get to, who you're trying to reach, where are they, and trying to understand the culture. And it's something, it can be repeated, and maybe you might want to zoom out and look at Western Europe, or you might want to look at USA. But I think there is certainly there's differentiation that needs to be made, as to how people are responding. I mean, my podcast, I think, is a great example of that, because I'm in the UK. I've obviously got British accent, and wasn't necessarily focusing on American wineries in the beginning, but at the start it was 40% audience from the UK, 25% from America, and it's now changed to where it's now 35% US and 32% UK. So US has now come up and has sort of overtaken. And I just think, again, that's a lot to do with going to Oregon and going to New York and now Washington. But I think it's also just looking at the underlying appreciation of podcasts. I think if any wineries are looking to reach the US and are looking to influence the US consumer, podcasting is a phenomenal way. And you will probably over-index in terms of reaching consumers or professionals or whoever your target is in the US versus other countries. Also then UK, Ireland, Canada, they're also, really getting into their podcast. But, the US will come. It's not a Field of Dreams analogy, but almost.
That's great. Well, Lawrence, where can people find out more about you? You mentioned your companies.
Yeah. So I'm in the process of redoing my website, which if this goes out in October, then it should certainly be done by then, which is interpretingwine.com.
Well, now you got a deadline.
Totally. And by all means, what I'd also recommend, and it's going to, I think, stay there forever, but I've put together a list of all of the equipment that I used, as I say, in those first sort of 400 episodes. And I put it online at interpretingwine.com/kit, KIT. And that is just there as a PDF for you to just go in and just look at what I was using in the early days, and just to see what I used and what got me so far. And it's not anything too fancy. It really isn't. It's just good basic kit. And of course, I've mentioned Instagram a few times. So I'm at interpretingwine on Instagram. Use them a little bit less, but at interpretingwine on Facebook. And of course, at Wine Podcast on Twitter.
Awesome. Well, Lawrence, thank you so much for joining us today.
Hey, my pleasure. Thank you.
Talk to you later.
All right.
Thanks for listening to the Legends Behind the Craft podcast. We'll see you again next time, and be sure to click subscribe to get future episodes.